Welcome to the TFO podcast, where guests get to give their thoughts, feelings, and opinions on a variety of subjects. This podcast is hosted by your very own Stacy Cook, and as always, sponsored by Fool's Guide Life Coaching. Follow me on all social media platforms. So give it up for our guest today. Yeah. Tell me about you. So tell me about Brian. Give me the Cliff Notes first.
Cliff Notes?
Yep.
So I was born in Albuquerque, New Mexico.
I did not know that. So we're already right off the top.
I was born in Albuquerque, New Mexico. My dad's a civil engineer. My mom's a nurse. And so they had jobs down there. And then before I was 2, we moved to New Orleans.
Okay.
And then I lived in a little town called Terrytown, which if you go to Luling and ask those guys, that's like not the nicest place to live, but it's where we could be at that time. But my parents were both from Omaha area, and their parents were not in great health, so we decided to move back. I think we moved to Omaha in 1977, so I was about 4. And then I graduated from Papillion High School just south of Omaha in 1991, went to Iowa State, got my undergraduate degree in chemical engineering, met my now wife my senior year. I interned at Maytag, and then we got married. I worked actually at Archer Daniels Midland in Clinton, Iowa, and Guadalajara, Mexico. I lived there for about 4 months.
Did not know that either.
There you go.
Yep.
And my Spanish was very good, and it's awful now. So I lived down there for about 4 months, doing. Basically, I was in the sugar refinery area there, and it was a really great eye-opening experience. Get to see different culture and how another country, people from another country view Americans, and that was a good thing because there's good and there's not so good, right? And particularly if you look at from a Mexican standpoint is, their view of border control and all the rest of that, and what they would see as, immigration control is seen as very different, right, than what you would see from an American standpoint, right? So that was very eye-opening for me. And then my wife got accepted to the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill for her master's degree. So we decided to move out there, and I worked for a water purification company, kind of up and down the East Coast. And then we had decided we really liked North Carolina. Chapel Hill was great. Mm-hmm. It's wonderful. The weather's great. It's a wonderful university. It's a great place to live. But all of our families were here, so all of our vacation was spent coming back here. So we were like, well, because my parents still live in Omaha, Wendy's family is just outside of Des Moines. We're like, well, instead of burning up all of our vacation to come back, how about we just move back, and then we can actually use our vacation to go where we want. And we were like horribly in debt by this point. Had no money.
All those
actually, we actually had negative money, to be honest with you. We had nothing at that point. And so I was like, I had a decent job, but it didn't pay a ton out there. And so we were just getting further and further behind, And so I was talking to John Willaz, who works here, who I grew up with. Mm-hmm. He and I have known each other since we were in kindergarten, so fast approaching 50 years, 45 years. And I happened to be talking to him one night, and he goes, hey, we're hiring. Do you want to come back and get a job here? So I did. And ironically enough, the weekend I came back was Formulations had a Christmas party, a pre-Christmas party at Kermit's, if you remember Kermit's.
I do, yeah.
And I got over there, and basically I found out everybody I was interviewing with on Monday was basically there and very, very inebriated. And so Perfect. I met everybody that I was going to interview ahead of time there. And then on Monday I walked in and they're like, hey, you're I'm like, yeah, that's me, right? Yep. So then I did get hired. I remember Oscar Berryman actually took me to breakfast. And it was a good interview. And then I started in February of 1998. So this February will be 25 years here. And so we moved back. I lived in Davenport, in the apartments right across from Red Lobster.
Oh, okay.
For a year.
Yeah.
And Kimberly, no, not Kimberly, that was my other. Anyway, then we built a house out in Walcott and lived in Walcott from 1999 until 2008. And then we had our son in 2002, my daughter in 2006. So my son is now 20 and my daughter's 16. Then we moved to Eldridge and have lived there since 2008. So we're fast approaching 14 years. My son is now a sophomore in college. My daughter is a sophomore in high school. And my wife works at John Deere. And that kind of brings me up to speed. And I've gone through a lot of different roles at the site.
Yep.
So there you go. That's me in a nutshell.
That's pretty good for 5 minutes worth.
I said, does that cover it?
No, I think so. One of the reasons why I wanted to get you on here is because I always talk to people about mentors and mentorship and what that is, and people are really scared about that. I think for some reason they think that they're going to be getting grilled by somebody and it's going to be like a painful experience. They hear about all their faults and things that they don't feel like that they can fix. So maybe this discussion will help them understand what a mentorship discussion looks like, right? So
I have value. I think in my younger years I did not value mentorship as much as I should have. And I think, not that I would change, there's very little I would change, in my life other than, individual silly little things, but, in the grand scheme of things, I've been very fortunate, very blessed, and I think there are some things that some potholes I could have avoided if I would have reached out to a mentor, and I think I would say, the best mentors I've been around have all been within probably the last 15 years. I have learned so much from them, kind of more in informal conversations like we have. I think, I'll credit you for really opening my eyes on a lot of just how on human behavior, right?
Yeah.
I have benefited greatly, from those relationships, and I think it's critical for people to really get the best out of themselves in order by mentoring.
This question I pulled to the front because I thought it was one of the ones that I thought that we have to make sure that we cover this. So, Brian, tell me a good story, like your best story. What's your best story?
Oh, my best story. Oof. I think one of the ones that I'll tell is like when you and I traveled out to Soda Springs.
The soda story is a
There's
good story.
I mean, there's so many things that go with the soda story, right? But I think the ones that there's little things like I could tell, because you and I mean, we knew each other, but hadn't hung out a lot,
right,
at that point. And so we jumped in the car. I remember we got at the airport, and I think we started off, and you're like, I think we should get the truck, and I'm like, nah, car's fine. Yeah. And then it was like, should we get the Garmin? Nah, we're good, and I just YOLO it out there where you were much more, prepared and everything like that. And we're just like, yeah, by the time we got up to the top of the mountain, it's like, yeah, there was some bad decision making, but we made it. Yes, But I think I found most interesting was, if you think you're from the U.S., right, that everybody in the U.S. is the same.
Right.
Yeah. It's like, oh, you're from Idaho, or you're from Utah, or you're from Nebraska, or you're from Illinois, and I think coming from a, shall we say, monochromatic background, as I did growing up, and you and I have talked about that, is, to me, it's like, hey, you walk into anywhere in the U.S. and you kind of get treated the same, right? And so when we got out there, I remember you and I walked in, and it was like a bad Western, right? It's like walks in and everybody's like, yeah. It's like, what the heck did we walk into here?
From,
right?
Yeah, you ain't from around here,
No,
are you?
I ain't from around here. Yeah. It's like, oh my goodness. That was one of the, I'd say, good learning opportunities for me to see. And you remember we went to the basketball game.
We did.
We went to the Utah Jazz Knicks game, I think it was.
Yeah.
And even that, it was again monochromatic when you're in there. It's like it was just a very eye-opening, and watching people react to you, and just I was like, oh my
I was a celebrity.
You were, yeah, and that's, I think, what I think what makes it so interesting. It was not like, who knows what their internal thoughts were, but it was literally like Michael Jordan was walking down when we walk around even the town, it's like, oh my gosh.
Wow, look at that.
If they would have had cell phones at the time, people literally would have been taking selfies with you. You were the most popular guy, like, everywhere, right? And so I just that was very impactful to me, because I think it was just so eye-opening from, that, as much as you read about it or you see about it until you, and I can never say that I experienced that. It never could be as pretentious or whatever to say that I did, because I didn't. But I was just watching it. I got to see it, right? And I was like, oh my goodness, right? And so there's two sides of that coin. There's the, if you see the positive side of that, meaning the positive, people being fascinated and wanting to come talk to you and treating you somewhat like a celebrity, is the positive half of that. Is that there is a negative alternative to that side, right, too, as well. And we've talked about that, but I think that was one of my better, as far as just eye-opening and fun. I really, plus you're just fun to be around, but it's like we'd walk into somewhere and it's like, okay, I know they're not looking at me. So, but that was one of my better stories. Plus we just had some fun interactions with the people there
so I learned afterwards the 80-20 rule, and that is 80% of the United States is pretty much the same, but there's like a 20% no matter where you go that is very different.
Absolutely.
And that was a very different experience.
It was, it absolutely was. And I think, it was, I think it goes back to, we've talked about it too, I think many people are naturally good-hearted,
right,
and are just curious, and it's an experience that is outside of people's daily norm. Right?
So I went back after, without you, I'm sorry, Brian, but
no,
I ended up going back to Idaho, and I got introduced to the Indians, the American Indians.
Okay.
So we ended up going to the bowling alley, and I felt probably about the American Indians like my original trip, and how people felt about me, because I'd never been around Indians before. It was a totally different experience for me as well.
Well, another little bit of nugget for you there is, so when we lived in New Mexico, my dad worked, he worked for a engineering firm, but a good friend of his worked for the Bureau, at the time it was Bureau of Indian Affairs, basically, but he worked on all the reservations and did all of their sanitary, like all their sewage and water treatment and power, and that was kind of his job. And the stories of how just isolated culturally from that the native population is there. I think you probably saw that, is that it is, you might as well be from a different planet.
Some of the things that different groups say about other groups, you see that those same words transferred over to different groups. So it's the same thought process, just transferred over to different groups.
Well, it definitely is, and I think that, if you look at, I was actually home in Omaha over Thanksgiving, and my dad's family is all Czech, Bohemian, and my dad's grandparents are the ones that came over.
Okay.
And they all formed into a community there because they were, and again, I'm not trying to equate it to any other group's experience, whether it's good or bad or whatever, so I'm not trying to say that they went through as many hardships as any other group did or anything like that. But they were isolated because there were other nationalities, particularly like German or anybody from Northern Europe, that the Eastern Europeans were the peasants, right? And so they were lesser, right? And so when my great grandparents came over, it was a very big deal that you wanted to separate yourself from the Czech language and from all of those things as fast as you can, because you were seen as lesser. So you wanted to be seen as American as you could be.
Right.
And so I always asked my dad, I'm like, how come you don't speak Czech? And he goes, yeah, we know nobody spoke Czech in the house, because it was that was not a thing to be proud of. That was something that you wanted to squashed down as much as possible because you wanted to be as American as possible. And so Dad and I were talking about it over the weekend. My great uncle was there, and he still speaks a little bit of Czech, and it's fun to listen to him, but it's very much of a dying, nobody in the U.S. speaks it anymore, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but it was just interesting talking with that experience of them being immigrants, and you wanted to separate yourself from as being non-American as possible, as fast as possible.
So do you think, and as you and I, it's going to go off the rails. We're going to get off the topic.
Should we get back on our list?
But now in our maturity, do you think that if that was the case today, that you would still want to keep that history, the language? Would you want to keep your culture, or would you still kind of do it the way that they did?
I don't know. I guess I can't. The problem is that I can't put myself necessarily in their shoes very well, because when they came over, they had nothing. I mean, they just. Yeah. I remember my dad telling me when he was little. I mean, what they grew and raised is they would go barter at the grocery store. Like if you wanted sugar or you wanted flour, they would bring butter or eggs or whatever, because they never had any money really. So you bartered for what food you got, and so whatever. Matter of fact, my aunt, my dad's sister, was there, and they were showing us some old pictures of Dad when he was little, and his jeans were rolled up, and they the bottom half were rolled, like about half mid-calf, or whatever, and they were making fun of me. He goes, well, you know why that was? He goes, because we got like one pair of jeans like every 2-3 years, and so as you grew, you just rolled them down. And you patched them because that's all you got, right? So I think for me to look back and say, would I do anything different? I can see exactly why they did what they did, because they wanted to make a better life and they didn't have anything, right? And so they tried to make that better, and I think we're very good at that. There are times, I think, just from a vanity standpoint, that I think I wish I could speak Czech because I think it's a neat thing and all the rest of that, but in the grand scheme, I can't really complain. So probably, if I'm really honest with myself, no, I don't
probably not.